Okay, so we've got a couple devices here, and this is the Raspberry Pi version 4, and this is the Arduino Mega. Doesn't look mega, it looks mini. But you might have heard, I've certainly heard these names, Arduino and Raspberry Pi, and this one looks like it's a little bit bigger than this one, maybe more powerful. No, in fact, this is actually much less powerful and much more specialized, is my understanding. So, I mean, for example, these connectors around here, I see a lot more connectors there compared to on the Raspberry Pi. So I guess this is more of a microcontrol centric specialized type of device.
Yeah, that's right, Jeff. So we do have this. This is the Arduino Mega is a microcontroller, where the Raspberry Pi is a system on chip, and this is a fundamental difference. The microcontroller have much more limitation, less memory, and also consume more power and less power.
Less power.
Yeah, less power. Actually, the here inside the microcontroller, you do have everything: the processor, the memory, the RAM. Everything is within one chip, and it will be much less than the Raspberry Pi.
So there is actually a CPU or a processor in there who's controlling what's happening, but it's not like this type of a CPU where you install an operating system and then it does everything. This is like a miniature computer, and this is a microcontroller. Is that right?
Yeah. So the Arduino CPU speed is between 8 and 16 megahertz, where the
Megahertz, 8 and
yes,
16 megahertz.
yes, exactly. When the Raspberry Pi is described in gigahertz, so it's 100 plus times faster than the Arduino. So the Raspberry Pi is much faster than
So this is the sports car,
exactly,
and this is your grandmother's car.
or the nail, or the total, or this really slow car that you do have. Yeah, and another fundamental thing, the Raspberry Pi but most of the case you'll have an operating system running it where you can interact directly and within the behavior of the board. On the other hand, the Arduino is really just running the code that you have to write in your computer and load it in your microcontroller. You can't change the code anymore of the microcontroller.
So this is for the for the Raspberry Pi, we upload into a little flat micro SD card that slides in there. We got some RAM memory, but on the Arduino, it's all here. So, and there's not a lot of room. So again, if you're writing code, you got to write that very tight, very efficiently.
Exactly. So you have like, if you're doing something as a hobbyist, you have plenty of space. But if you want like to make complex stuff, like even storing a picture is becoming very challenging for the Arduino, because the memory that you do have in the Arduino is in few kilobytes. So there is not enough memory to do complex stuff. If you do have simple things, simple interaction, the Arduino is the right device to use.
And also the input I/O, the connectivity on the Raspberry Pi. There's just many more options available, much more computer-like.
That's right. That's right. So the Raspberry Pi features is you do have computer-like input-output, and also the GPIO, the general purpose input-output pins. One big difference, and really need to everyone to be careful about it, those pins for the Raspberry Pi are only 3.3 volts, and if you do apply 5 volt to them, you may damage your Raspberry Pi. So be very careful about that.
Be careful.
On the other hand, the Arduino, it will depend on the version, but there's some version that deliver and receive 3.3 volt, where this version, like this one, this is a 5 volt one. So it can tolerate a 5 volt, so it opens the door to more applications.
More hardware it can interact with.
Exactly, more hardware, more sensors, exactly that kind of things. But just It can nowadays most of the sensors are using 3.3 volts, so the Raspberry Pi is good. But in the old days, maybe since 10 years, like 10 years ago, the 5 volt was the standard.
Hmm.
So just careful when you manipulate the Raspberry Pi for some embedded application to connect with other hardware, that you are having the right voltage going on. And finally, another thing is about the power consumption. The Raspberry Pi, so the Arduino, which is a microcontroller, consumes far away much less power than the Raspberry Pi.
Okay.
I think that's all. So for the Raspberry Pi and the Arduino families.